Testament. So we've looked at when I'm feeling amazed, when I'm feeling despairing, when I'm feeling good, when I'm not feeling good, and today we're looking at when I'm feeling troubled or afraid. Now, I'd like to start with a bit of a customer survey this morning. Let's test your honesty in the church. I'm going to just go through a couple of things that might cause you to feel troubled or afraid. And if you know, honestly, that's something that bothers me, I'd like you to wave your hand in the air. So let's go for it. Who is afraid or troubled by spiders? Big ones, yeah. Big, massive, horrible spiders. Yeah, quite a few, okay. What about snakes? Any snake fearers? Oh, quite a lot. Oh, snakes are edging above spiders. Okay, what about heights? Anybody not too fond of being on heights? I'm not great with heights. Yeah, quite a few. I see those hands. We'll pray for you afterwards. Now, I'm going to flash up a couple of images. So this is a government health warning, okay? Please do not faint at the next slide. There may be some images that disturb you. Here's the warning, okay? There we go. So a question that I'd like to ask this morning, of whom or what are you afraid? There's some fairly obvious ones like heights and spiders and things like that. Sharks, I think, yeah, that's a reasonable fear, being in the cage. That needles, anybody got a needle phobia? Yeah, okay, yeah, not too good with the old being stabbed for some blood. Buttons, that's one that always gets me. I don't know why people are afraid of buttons, but some people really struggle with that one. Roller coasters, perhaps. Clowns. Clowns at the moment, all those adverts on the telly for the horror film It, they're very disturbing, aren't they? So there's a whole range of things that people respond to with feelings of certainly discomfort, maybe troubled. Oh, I get troubled if there's a spider around. Or maybe really, really afraid or even phobic of certain things. Here's a good one. I love this. Hippopotomonstrous-esquipedaliophobia. Do you know what that's a fear of? Long words. But we can be afraid of a whole range of things. Creatures, items, objects, things like dolls, needles, balloons, roller coasters, even buttons. Long words. Spaces. What about confined spaces, elevators and underground in the caves, or the opposite of that, big wide open spaces, they can be scary. Flying, being near water, storms, the list is quite endless. And then there's our own circumstances and environment. Some people are afraid of germs, or of getting ill, or of change, or of getting old, or falling down, or letting go of things. Ooh. Sometimes we get troubled by feelings and thoughts to do with abandonment or loneliness or failure, or the opposite, success. Might be afraid to succeed and do well because then there are responsibilities that come with that. And then there are the more abstract things. Some people might be fearful of commitment, love, intimacy, being alone, the future, the unknown, noise, silence, God, anything supernatural. Maybe some people fear itself. And all those things that we've kind of already touched on are in the top 100 list of people's most frequent and common phobias. And the word phobia comes from the Greek root word phobos, which means to fight or to run away from, which is why we have, whatever it might be, phobia. That's where it comes from. And I've put the picture of the rabbit there because it's kind of that rabbit in the headlight feeling. If you're driving down a dark lane and a rabbit comes into your headlights, it will do one of two things. It will either flee very quickly or it will freeze like a rabbit trapped in the headlights. That's where the expression comes from. And fear is a very real thing. We all experience it at different times, and it will cause us either to run or to fight or to freeze. And it's one of our most basic human instincts. And when we feel afraid or troubled, we can experience a whole range of physical symptoms along with that. And it can be anything from, a mild anxiety that sets us off to a really dramatic feeling of terror. And you can break out in a sweat, can't you? I break out in sweats when I see spiders. We all experience the emotion, but it can have an effect on us. Maybe your stomach knots, maybe your blood pressure gets raised. Maybe even extreme fear can lead to heart attacks and things like that. But sometimes fear is a very positive thing. Fear is the thing that will stop us taking silly risks near the edge of a cliff. I'm afraid of falling over, so logically, to avoid that, I'm going to take a few steps backwards, especially from the cliff at Seaford at the moment. If you fear wasps, that's very reasonable and logical. They could sting you. So fear will stop you from going and prodding a wasp's nest. It's fear that would stop you poking a stick at a crocodile. So it's a very good, healthy, sensible thing. But fear and feeling afraid and feeling troubled can also be very crippling and paralysing and stop us enjoying abundance and the abundant life that we could have. For example, being afraid of flying might stop you experiencing some wonders of other cultures and other places. Might stop you enjoying the joy of trying a new food or a new activity. Fear of failure might stop you from even bothering to apply for that job. Fear might stop you making a new friend. As anyone who's ever kind of spoken in any context in a church or a group will know, whatever the thing is that you're going to talk about, usually in the lead up to talking about that thing, you get challenged in it at some point. And this is a very real thing. At least 3 times as I've been preparing this message, I have encountered nasty spiders very unexpectedly. Okay, so this is my confession this morning. And my usual response when I see a spider is freeze. I freeze. My second response is to go, "Mum! Bring the jar!" Okay, so 3 times as I've prepared this word, this has happened to me. One morning, I walked downstairs, and completely unbeknownst to me, a spider had been busy during the night and formed a web from the ceiling to the kitchen table, and my face went into it. And in the middle of the web, lo and behold, was Mrs. Spider. I was freaked. I yelled. I thought, calm down, calm down. I'm going to dwell in the shadow of the Most High, rest in the Almighty. It's only a spider. So I dealt with it, chucked it outside, and so on. Oh, no, I didn't, actually. I left it under a glass with a Post-it note on top that said, "Mum, there's a big hairy spider under here. Please remove it." The second time, I was going to bed, and as I was about to lie down, I looked up, and there, right above your pillow, why is it always above your pillow? There was a huge spider on the ceiling. And I just laughed because I thought, I really have to deal with this. I can't be afraid of a spider. It's ridiculous. So I did call Mum for some moral support because we share a house. She brought the jar, the spider jar, and I was standing on a chair, and she said, go on, just trap it, you'll be okay, you'll be okay. And I'm like, oh, I really don't like them. But she was with me, giving me the moral support I needed. Those of you who don't have arachnophobia, you're thinking, don't be a wuss, just do it. I was shaking. So I got the jar, trapped it on the ceiling, swirled it around, put the lid on. I was like, and out the bathroom window it went. And I don't know why, but there seemed to have been, just the last week or two, a number of spiders living in the wing mirrors of my car. Does that happen to anybody else? Yeah, where do they go in there? So I thought, being the mature, God-fearing woman that I am and a minister of the gospel, I did what any sensible person would do and call my mum. But I thought, in truth, if I can't face a spider, if I can't conquer the spider, how am I going to conquer the world? If I can't conquer this little troubling feeling that I have in my stomach over a spider like this, how am I going to cope when I'm abroad and a tarantula falls in front of my face? That happened to me abroad in the Pacific Islands. I was preaching, had a big Bible open, and a big spider did drop down from the ceiling. And I just got my Bible and went, well, that's the word of God for today. You know, there are no psalms about how to tackle spiders. Not that I've found, anyway. But there are things from the Psalms we can learn about fear. We're probably familiar with the quotes that Franklin D. Roosevelt famously made. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. But we often ignore the following part of his speech, which said, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyses our needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. So sometimes there are very valid reasons for fear and for feeling troubled, and it's okay to feel that. But we also know as Christians that God hasn't given us a spirit of fear or timidity, but of love, power, and sound mind or self-discipline. So what do we do when we feel afraid? And the Psalms that we've read this morning give us a clue. So we're going to look at what David does when he's feeling troubled. So firstly this morning, and if you're taking notes, there is an outline in the back page almost of the news sheet this morning. The first thing we can look at is that David looks at the circumstances very realistically, but he makes a positive confession in the face of fear. Now, when I say positive confession, I don't mean the kind of extreme doctrine that teaches if you proclaim enough, I'm a millionaire, you will suddenly be blessed with riches. I'm not talking about that kind of positive confession. But what I'm talking about is saying, yes, there is a real threat, there is a danger, but... And we know that David had experience of this because remember him as a small boy fighting Goliath, the great big giant. A giant is a real fear, real threat. And he said, you know, a fearful mindset will say, you know, I'm doomed here. I'm doomed, we're doomed. But we don't have to be afraid. And if we make a positive confession, we're going to start to believe it. So we can see in the Psalms that David says that the enemies are surrounding him and advancing against him to devour him. This is Psalm 27, verse 2. When the wicked are advancing against me, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Excuse me. So he knows that the threat and the thing that is making him fearful is real, but he makes a positive declaration in the face of it. Excuse me. In Psalm 91, he says, I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge. He is my fortress. These are the positive truths that he proclaims in the face of a fearful situation. So what can we learn from that? Well, here's the thing. Sometimes fear might be an acronym that stands for frightening evidence appearing real, or even false evidence appearing real. And I've got a picture of Scooby-Doo and Shaggy there because in the cartoon of Scooby-Doo, endless episode after endless episode reveals that the scary monster or ghost that the gang are frightened of is actually Mr. Jones, the banking clerk, who's actually just trying to play some pranks or commit a crime. And it's false. There's actually nothing really to be afraid of. It's only Mr. Jones with a sheet over his head pretending to be a ghost. So it's false evidence. But at the time you're feeling fearful, it appears real. So what we can learn from both Psalm 27 and Psalm 91 is that we can name the fear, admit the fear, and say, yes, there's a big spider, yes, I am afraid of it a little bit, it's troubling me, it's giving me feelings, but I can confidently assert the truth. I'm big, it's small, it's not going to do me any harm. And as I proclaim that truth, the reality dawns on me that I'm the one with power in this situation. I will not fear this. I am big enough to handle it. That's the truth. And as I proclaim truth, I will begin to believe it. Secondly, David asserts his confidence in the Lord and in who his God is. As we read through Psalm 27, he personalises these qualities of God. Excuse me. The Lord is my light. He's my salvation. He's not just a light. He's not just a big beaming light out there. He's my light. He guides me. He's like this shaft of light in a dark place. He's my stronghold. He's my helper. He's not just a random helper out there for the whole world. He's my helper. He personalises this great and amazing God and says, no, he's here for me. Jesus is called Emmanuel, God with us. And perhaps today you're kind of in this situation where you know, oh yeah, I've heard God is light, I've heard God is a helper, but make him personal to you. Say, Lord, will you be my light and my stronghold, my salvation? And when you're feeling troubled or afraid, God will do one of three things. He will help you in it, help you through it, or save you from it. He is our deliverer. He will ultimately bring us through. You know, there's no guarantee that we will always have a rosy and comfortable life without troubles and nothing to make us feel afraid or scared. But when we do feel afraid, God is in the midst of that. He's not the one who's going to inflict it upon us and bring the trouble to us, but when we are in that situation, he will be with us in it. And that's why David asserts at the end of Psalm 27, I remain confident of this. I will see God's goodness in the land of the living, not just in the great by and by, although we will see God's greatness then, but I will see his goodness here and now in my life. So what we can learn is that we can personalise the reality of God. We can identify and see God's goodness in the trial. God does not say you won't have trouble. In fact, quite the opposite. Jesus said in this life, in this world, you will have trouble. That's a nice guarantee, isn't it? That's a nice encouragement for us this morning. If you love Jesus, you're going to find trouble in the world. But fear not, says Jesus, because I've overcome it. And we will see God's goodness in the trial. Thirdly, David takes refuge in God. We've got some images there of fortresses and ramparts in dry places, but we also have this beautiful image of a mother swan gathering her chicks, her cygnets, under her wings. And we get both of these images in Psalm 91. We get the strong, secure fortress and ramparts that God is for us. But also, if we choose to dwell in him, if we rest in him, he takes us under his wing. He's very nurturing and loving and will be protective like a mother bird with her chicks. And David says, I will dwell. I want to dwell in the house of the Lord. I want to dwell in his presence. I want to dwell in his shelter and his shadow. You know, a few weeks ago when we were talking about feeling sad and feeling depressed, we said it's okay to visit Sadville sometimes, but don't take up permanent residency there. And it's the same with feeling afraid and troubled. We will experience fear at times, but I'm not going to reside in a place of fear. I'm going to dwell instead in the refuge of my God, says David. And this is very reminiscent of the chapter in John's Gospel where Jesus says, abide in me, remain in me. I'm the vine, you're the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So remain in me. And these words all conjure up the same image, dwelling, abiding, resting in him. He will cover you with his feathers. And feathers aren't very strong, but the image is of that complete protection. So what can I learn? I can learn to take refuge in God when I am feeling troubled and afraid. Because fear is to run away from, that's great, but we need something to run into. And it's into the protection of God. I once heard fear described as the dark room where all your negatives get processed. Your negatives get developed in a dark place. So we need to get out of the dark room and into the light of God. So how does this all apply to me personally, you might ask? Well, Psalm 91 starts with these words: whoever dwells in the shadow of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. There's a whoever. So if you have chosen to make the Lord your refuge, this applies to you. Eric has printed on all the youth material now and on keyrings and things an expression that says expect the Lord to do great things, based on this verse in Psalm 27 verse 14. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. And the translation that Eric's picked up to impart to our young people is confidently expect God to do great things. Thanks. Excuse me. Developed a cold this week. It's not helpful. But I will confidently expect to be fine in a couple of days' time. So David says, confidently expect the Lord. Wait on him. Confidence. Take refuge in his shelter, his protection, his goodness. I'm amazed at the number of times when I've come through a difficult situation and think, I don't have a clue about how much God was protecting me in that. And then I'm amazed by it. Fourthly, David determines his part and acknowledges what's God's part in all of this. David's will is to dwell in the presence of God, to gaze on his beauty, to seek him. And we have that verse. And it kind of covers the mental aspects, the emotional aspects, and the physical aspects. Be strong in your mind. We all have battles in our mind, but we need to take strength and say, no, I don't have to believe my feelings here. I don't have to believe the thoughts that say the spider is going to rise up and kill me and attack me, because it's not. And if I can win that battle in my mind and tell myself, no, I'm the big one here, then things are going to change. Take heart, be courageous. You might be a little kitten, but feel like a lion. Be encouraged in your emotional life and wait on the Lord. That doesn't mean just hang around and waiting for God. We're not doing anything. It means seek him, press into him. It's all of our being. It's worshipping God with heart, mind, soul and strength. That's our part. That's what we can do, like David, when we're feeling troubled. My part is to be strong, take heart and wait on God, to seek him. As the phrase goes, don't just sit there, pray something. Don't just sit there, pray something. Wait on the Lord. And we're told and encouraged that we can then trample and tread on the head of snakes and scorpions and serpents and lions and all these horrible things which both conjure up images of real physical threats and also spiritual threats. And we need to rise up a little bit and realise that in Christ we have authority to trample on the things that come against us. We can stamp on them and say, no, I won't have worry and anxiety. No, I won't have lies in my head saying that I'm useless. I'm going to trample on those things. It's a great image in the scripture. Those who have chosen to dwell in the shelter of the Most High can then trample and tread on the heads of snakes and scorpions. So if you've got a snake phobia, remember that verse from Psalm 91. Reinhard Bonnke said this. He said, Satan prowls around like a lion, but he's really just a mouse with a megaphone. Notice Satan isn't a lion, but he prowls around like one, looking to devour. But really, he's just a mouse with a megaphone. Sometimes the fears shout loud. But that's all it is, just a noise. You know, we need to develop the attitude of kids in the playground. It's like, yeah, well, my dad's bigger than your dad. My dad can win this battle, you know. God is on our side. We can overcome. So feeling afraid isn't a problem, but being bound by fear and being bound by our troubled thoughts is a problem. And this is when we need to say, well, my role is to seek God. God's part is to come and meet me in it and to give me that confidence and courage so that when they're looking at me, they're looking actually at the bigger guy behind me. I don't know if you've seen the advert on the telly at the moment with the meerkats. And, little Sergei, this tiny little guy, knocks his glasses off and he's trying to defend his friend and fight for his friend. And these guys are trying to beat him up. And he's only this tiny little meerkat. But behind him is Colin Firth. Now that's a blessing, isn't it? But Colin's behind him and he's a spy and he's got all the gadgets and the gizmos to protect him. And little Sergei, the little meerkat, thinks, whew, I'm tougher than I thought. When really it's the big guy behind him that's done the fighting. That's who we are. We're in that situation. When we're afraid, we're little Sergei, the little meerkat. But we've got the best spy, the best guy behind us who's bigger and actually is the strong one in the situation. So we have authority to rise up and say no to the things that make us afraid. And finally, David expresses himself creatively. When he's feeling afraid, he says, hang on a minute, what I'm going to do is I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. This is the attitude that rises up and says, do you know what, I'm going to laugh in the face of adversity. I'm going to go and make shouts of joy in the house of God. Yes, I'm feeling troubled. Yes, I'm afraid. But you know what? I'm going to just smile anyway. I'm just going to get on and start to praise God. I will sing. You can see he's determining his will. I will sing. I will go and make sacrifices to God. I will make music to the Lord. And he determines that his feelings of fear, his feelings of being troubled, won't stop him taking action and worshipping God. He determines his will, acknowledges God's part, but then he expresses it. And when you're feeling afraid or troubled, a very practical thing to do is to think, how can I kind of release the power that this fear has over me? Well, try writing it down. Try writing your prayers to God. Try expressing it in a painting. Determine, I will make music. I'm going to sing about this to the Lord. I'm going to do something to release the kind of energy that's behind the fear and the trouble and the anxiety. I'm going to turn my feelings into art and poetry and song and then give it to God. So my heart and my message this morning is that when we feel afraid, we have a big God standing behind us who's got our back. There isn't a guarantee of a life of no trouble, but he is with us in it and he will deliver us from it. And my hope is that we'll go from being rabbits caught in the headlights and either paralysed or running away to being like this guy. Come on, I'm not afraid of you. That we will know God has got our backs, that though we might be troubled and surrounded by enemies and surrounded by things that are fearful, we can rise up and say, I'm not afraid. Amen.